One of the many features here at the Pennsylvania Farm Show is the Penn State Extension. And so many things that the Penn State Extension does throughout the community, but also with the farming community. And here today with Dr. Gregory Martin from the Extension, and you are a poultry specialist, and we're going to talk a little bit about the avian bird flu, which is something that's been talked about in the news. And if you could just explain what the poultry industry, as part of the ag, being the biggest industry in Pennsylvania, what the avian flu, what are some of the challenges or opportunities we have with that virus?
Sure. Last year we didn't have any poultry at all here at the farm show because we were being very, very cautious about the bird flu. It cost the United States over $1 billion in order to clean up the death loss that we had in the Midwest due to avian flu. So whenever we see or hear of wild birds coming down with this bird flu or carrying this bird flu, we become very, very cautious about it. And so Penn State Extension, in cooperation with the Department of Ag and other stakeholders, our industry partners, we have been really pushing the idea of biosecurity throughout the Commonwealth. By having a biosecure farm, we're actually reducing the risk of wild birds, for example, coming into contact with poultry and therefore getting this disease.
Now, when you say biosecure farm,
Sure.
I'm sure the folks in the agriculture industry understand that, but what exactly does that entail?
So that's the idea of biosecurity is not too uncommon if you were thinking about a hospital drama. If you ever see a hospital drama where the nurse or the doctor actually puts something on, a gown or special equipment around them, that's basically what they're doing on the farms now, so that we put barriers between the birds and the outside world, so that we're actually compartmentalizing the farm so that no chance of virus can be transmitted into and around the birds themselves. So most of the poultry farms that we have in Pennsylvania do practice a good deal of hygiene on the farm. They're always cleaning, sweeping, dusting, and so forth, as well as making sure that they're wearing clean clothes onto the farm each and every time they're visiting those flocks.
Now, with the avian bird flu, if you have folks that maybe they have 10 or 20 chickens at their residence, maybe they get the eggs. What can they do to protect themselves and to protect their chickens?
That's a great question. Small flocks are just as vulnerable to avian flu as large flocks. Anytime you have wild birds that can infiltrate your farm or your backyard flock, you got to be careful of that. So what we suggest to folks that may have just a small group of chickens is to make sure that they have a bird secure area to where they can put their birds into a pen, for example, a netted pen, and that will prevent wild birds from commingling with their particular flock. The other thing they can do is wear different footwear, so as they come onto to work with their birds, feed their birds, water their birds or whatever, they're wearing shoes that only are worn inside that pen. When they come out of the pen, they change their shoes and they walk around in their street shoes everywhere else. So as they walk in and out, they're being very, very clean, very, very careful. And then they're washing their hands before they handle their birds so that everything that they touch is clean.
And where does the avian bird flu, originate from? Obviously, we've seen the news stories a few years back about the epidemic in China. There were several deaths where it actually had humans had contacted the virus. How
Right.
is that still at risk, and what can the average person do to avoid that?
So we call that zoonosis, where a disease jumps from an animal to a human and causing illness. And the cases that we saw were indeed in Asia, where the caretaker was actually living amongst the birds, and so he was in continual contact with those birds. And so that poses a problem. Here in the United States, we tend to live away from our animals, and so that helps break that biosecurity risk between the birds and the farmers themselves. And so many of the times that we see, especially when the last avian flu hit the United States, it was a bird-only disease, so it wasn't contagious to humans, but we always worry about that risk of it jumping to humans. So that zoonosis is an important feature, and that's why we take all the precautions we can to make sure our farms are biosecure and that we prevent the spread of flu to the United States.
And with that, what are some of the problems? Obviously, just in the wild birds that are contacting us. What are some of the issues that it's causing among our wild bird population?
Well, the wild bird populations, a lot of times, especially with very virulent avian flu, death loss is the first feature you see. And that's what we saw in the Midwest. The first symptom that we had was a huge die-off. And so there are some wild populations that are being decimated by this flu. If they get it and they can't handle it, they're going to die. The other part of it is that if they manage to survive, they become carriers and then they can move it around. And so a lot of the flu that we saw last year originated in Asia, and they went up the flyway across the Arctic and then back down into North America on their normal migration paths. And so that's why we always are watching and blood testing wild populations as well as our own domestic flocks for this disease.
And one of the things that you had mentioned earlier in our discussion before we were on camera was the fact that most people think that with a virus or a disease, and when you have cold temperatures, as we have experienced here the last few weeks in Pennsylvania, that you're going to see a die-off or there's going to be less chance of contacting a virus. And you said actually the opposite, and the bird flu would thrive in the colder temperatures, and the warmer temperatures actually will kill off the virus.
Hot, dry weather actually kills the virus, and so we always pray for hot weather to help with this disease, and that was the case in the Midwest last year. And so when it's cold winter months like this, the virus actually lasts a long time. It could last up to a month in a puddle of water at 40 degrees, for example. And so, that's why this time of year is the really critical time for all farmers or anybody who's handling poultry to be very, very careful with biosecurity.
Now, if somebody wanted to find out a little bit more information on this, we are going to actually run out of time. We have quite a few interviews to do here. How would they go about contacting the extension? What's the best way to get a little bit more information? Is there a website?
Absolutely. Every county has an extension office, and all of our extension offices are trained to handle poultry calls about avian flu. You can also go on our website, extension.psu.edu, and there's a little button to the left of the main webpage that has avian flu resources. And right there, they can get all the information from our avian influenza website.
Well, Doctor, I appreciate your time today and taking a little bit of time to kind of explain exactly what the avian flu is. We see it on the news, but just to explain a little bit more about it, what we can do to protect our wild birds and also protect our poultry industry. So thank you very much, Doctor. I appreciate your time.
You bet.